What is up, fellow hosts and humans? Welcome to my Westworld Season 4, Episode 4 recap, review, and breakdown. And my God, we just need to talk about the biggest events that happened in this episode, because I feel as though those alone I could talk for the next 2 hours about. And I just feel like we've got so many answers now to so many questions, yet there's still so many answers we need with some of the revelations that have been made in this episode. Of course, we're going to talk about those biggest reveals, get in some theory crafting, and take a little peek at the promo for next episode at the end of this video. Can't wait to get into all of this, and of course, I'm expecting to see your comments and theories down in the comment section. And also, for those of you who are enjoying these videos week to week, would really appreciate, before you go on, to hit that like button. Just takes 2 seconds of your time. I would really appreciate it. It helps boost the video out there just that little bit more. Perhaps we can attract some other hosts and humans to contribute their theories down in the comments as well. So at the beginning, of course, we pick up with Caleb getting infiltrated with the freaking flies, the parasite, and that's where we get to a little bit of that flashback. Finally, we're getting context to the flashback of what happened to Caleb. And so they went in, took out the guards, set the charges, and all of this was very familiar to us. But unfortunately, when they flew out, a guard came and clipped Caleb with a bullet. In this moment, I really thought it was leading up to something, because he was clearly almost dying in this moment. He was internally bleeding. And, you know, Maeve started doing some stuff. This is what I mean. I think I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you were thinking a similar thing with, what are they going to do? This is where Maeve started busting out some of her force kind of stuff, even giving him a taste of heaven. And I want to kind of give you my thought process at the time, because at this point I was like, okay, well, she knows he's dying, and she's just trying to facilitate a heaven-like aura in his brain, because she says, you want to know what freedom feels like? And he's like, what are you doing? And then she says, I can hack into your limbics. I felt it a long time ago. And that's where we get Maeve somewhat giving her own experience to Caleb of what that life can be like. It's almost like the taste she got of the valley beyond, you know, with her daughter there. I believe you even see the tree in the Sublime, the very one that actually I believe we saw last episode catch fire when Bernard was going through all of these different trippy avenues before he met up and had that conversation about seeing all of these different possibilities that led him to the path we see him on in the 23 years later present day, which again, great that we have an answer for that now, because there's so many things that we can connect. And one thing I'm happy about with this Westworld episode is sometimes they do try and go very clever, and as we know with season 2, even though I was a fan of quite a bit of it, it did kind of throw some people off, because with aspiring for a really trippy, complicated storyline, it can lose interest and attention span in people. But in this episode, whilst it was like walking the line of really trying to be confusing at times, it did put that effort in to make it all make sense at the end. So with this part here, for example, when we pick up with Halloris saying wakey wakey to Caleb, he asks, what did you do to me? He's like, well, I'm going to do to all your kind. I made you my pet. This all seems like the present day. I mean, and arguably it is, because all of these events did unfold the way they did with Caleb this episode. In this moment, Maeve fighting the man in black after this, getting out the park with Halloris all the way up until that dig site. All of that happened. But as we know, it is all, you know, speaking to this larger fidelity test. So if anything, this is kind of a recap, what we're witnessing in what we thought were these present day scenes at this very beginning part of the episode. We know that the park, and I guess now 23 years ago, was purely built so that the more guests that come will be infected by the parasite. So whoever quite literally enters the park will become a carrier. And I liked how Halloris was like, I prefer the term host. So we have the man in black and Maeve have a bit of back and forth. He was taunting about how he took down all of her friends, how disappointing, how easy it was. Clementine would be an example of that. I love Maeve's comment about Halloris here saying, and I thought Wyatt was Dolores's dark side. Meanwhile, the man in black woke up after the fight, started boosting the signal again, and all the guests in the park started, you know, receiving the signals, and a bit of anarchy was unfolding in the streets, all while Caleb was finding it incredibly hard to resist. This all got up into a point of where Caleb starts to pick up the gun, and I wasn't a really big fan of this moment, to be honest, because this whole time, if you want to look at it the way it was filmed, Maeve was looking at Caleb, Caleb was standing in the middle of the street, and then it got up until the point of where that other person stabbed him, and then she proceeded to shoot him with her handgun. I don't really understand how it got to that point. Why shoot the guy afterwards? You saw him coming for Caleb. You could have prevented him from getting stabbed, if you know what I mean. Not really a huge deal, though, in the grand scheme of things, given what happened to Caleb ultimately. Either way, though, this is where they got in the car, and this is more or less leads up to that dig site moment. So before we move on to that, let's get on to Christina's storyline. And this was quite refreshing because I've been wondering about Christina, you know, the new Dolores, if you will. And now more than ever, again, really trying to refrain myself from getting too far ahead of myself with the reveals at the end. It's just like, okay, so what is going on with you? So we pick up with Christina having overslept. We have Maya, her roommate, come back. And now more than ever, recapping this, the dialogue makes quite a bit of sense. This nightmare of hers, because she also couldn't sleep with regards to flies. Basically, they were having a picnic with a family. Flies started landing, and then it ultimately ended up in a way that her father was, you know, engulfed in them, a mother, and then eventually her. And it's just like, that may have very well happened in the past at some point in time, because long story short, a lot of people, if not, as Halora says, this is my world, she's taken over the world, so everyone at this point, or for the most part that is, because we do have C and her team, such as Jay, the leader, the seeming leader that is, with Bernard, there is a resistance out there who are fighting for other people's freedom in the 23 years later present day world, but most people, yeah, like Maya in this moment, are probably having some part of their brain remembering the origin of when they were made, I guess, hosts, or, you know, with the parasite. And Christina, interestingly as well, started drawing that kind of same unhinged drawing of the tower. So it does seem like there could be some people who are waking up to what is going on. They know it doesn't fit. For example, Peter is an example. The homeless guy is an example. And I'm wondering, because we got the language used in a conversation between C and J in the Bernard 23 years later timeline, which ironically actually is the same time setting as what we're talking about with Christina and Maya in this moment, he does say later that there are other outliers out there. We can't just leave her. We need to kind of go free her or something like that. So I'm wondering if the people who are starting to identify what's going on, this is just like me inserting a theory off the cuff here. I could be completely wrong, but I do think that word of outlier will become somewhat important, because there are clearly people out there who for some reason or another haven't been infected with flies. Maybe they're lucky, maybe they've avoided it, or maybe they're outliers and can't be infected with the parasite, or outliers are just some people in the population of those controlled, like in the city that we see Caleb run out into at the end of the episode, the same city Christina is in, Maya is in, etc., etc. I wonder if, as I said, people like Peter, the homeless guy, could be these outliers who could maybe join the ranks of this resistance. But let me know what you think of that. Either way, this got up into a point of where Maya was like, we're going out again. She doesn't really want to, Christina that is, but Christina turns up to the bar. You know, she puts some lipstick on, and I recognize this moment from the trailers, so I knew what was going to happen, and that is she drops it, and then Teddy picks it up. And we've seen Teddy before, earlier on. He actually was the one to save her from Peter. And I love the line, don't mind me, just trying to look chivalrous. So this is what I mean, guys. Like, with all these answers, it's like, so there are some questions that we really don't have answers to that make the existing questions we already had so much more intriguing with the answers and context we have been provided this episode. So now that we know Christina's world is the 23 years later world where Caleb woke up as a host, where Bernard and C are digging, his daughter are digging. So who are you, Teddy? What is going on with you? Because as we could tell with the little chat up lines and dialogue, he isn't so subtle. The way he looks at her as well is very endearing, and he says he feels like he's known her for lifetimes, and she's got a familiar vibe with her. So there's this big question now that I know I'm repeating myself a bit, but it's like, okay, if in a city and a world that is now created by Halora, she's made humans her pets, why is there someone who looks just like Dolores called Christina? What's the deal with that? Where has this Teddy person come from? So just to give you a peek into my mindset at this point, I was like, clearly he knows more than what he's letting on. He was teasing about his previous lives, and he knows there's obviously something more to this Dolores. I'm wondering if they can activate like a second coming of Dolores with Christina. I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to be the case. I'm just spitting out theories left, right, and center here. But clearly Teddy, or whatever his name is, I'm wondering if he has somehow come from the Sublime or something like that, where they had worlds upon worlds upon worlds. They look like they've transcended, as we know, last episode, to a whole other level that has assisted Bernard now to become very overpowered with how he knows all these possibilities of what's going to happen. So is Teddy from the beyond trying to assist in his own little way? I don't know. Like, it's nuts. I don't really have any justification to what I just said. What is going on with Teddy? So let me know what theories you have there. Anyway, with good old Bernard, we have C kind of disagreeing with J, and that's when he says that outlier line by saying, that was before we found another outlier. We got to extract her fast before she's hunted down. So without retreading all of my outlier theory stuff, I do wonder what's going on there. There's a moment in the next episode promo where we see the man in black holding a gun to someone. I have no idea who that woman is, but at the same time, Jay does refer to this outlier as her that they want to extract. Again, outliers. They clearly want these outliers to join them. This got up into the point of where Jay was about to shoot them, but C was like, nope, not letting you. Turns out her girlfriend, thank God for her, got in the way, came to a resolution where she is gonna go with Bernard to dig some things up, but Jay requests Stubbs to go on the extraction mission with him. And again, this could lead into that promo for next episode, because just integrating that into now, we see Stubbs, Jay, and some of these resistance people in the city, where we see all the people around like civilians, but again, they're like the host civilians now, so they all recognize them. So they're all kind of creeped out by that. So it does seem like they're trying to go there to rescue an outlier. Could be that woman that I said that you're seeing on screen right now that William is threatening. To go into the city, though, does seem very kind of sus for me. All that effort to just extract one person when all of you could be compromised. And this is where Stubbs is going along with them, because it is quite funny in this moment. Bernard is like, it's for safety, and Stubbs is like, at least I'll be safe. And Bernard is like, I didn't mean yours, because he's already seen what happens with Stubbs. In actuality, Stubbs will be providing safety for the human team that goes in for this outlier extraction mission. So this is where we have Bernard go to the location with C on where to dig. She threatens if this isn't where the weapon is, she'll have no other choice to put him out of his misery. And I love, again, the lines that he says, like, I know, has done it plenty before. So he's acknowledging there's plenty of alternate timelines where she has had to kill him, because it was also acknowledged later on through a process of elimination. Bernard knows to dig to where to find Maeve, the weapon, out of all the other times he's digged in the wrong places, and actually has been put down by C through digging in the wrong place. At this point in time, we see a drone, and I feel like it's kind of a bit like Terminator if you think about it. The machines have taken over, and you've got some resistance fighters out there trying to avoid detection. So we have Bernard walk out onto the open. You have to think that he's doing this to trigger a certain sequence of events, and it turns out he was right. He got covered over by C, and they avoided the control under that little cover there, or rug they were under, but he saw that beetle, and it's like he probably knew he had to kind of find that beetle to set off where he needed to go to get onto the right path for the right location of where to find Maeve, if you're still with me. Back with Caleb and Maeve, this is where they're on the road with Halloris in the back, but this parallels the past. Once again, this is where we get the answers, really. And again, it kind of subverted my expectations, because I thought there'd be something larger to what was going on here, but not really, to be honest. So it just turns out, like, it cuts from when he was dying on, like, the lighthouse area to being in hospital. She sat by his bedside for weeks, fearing the worst, and she kind of had a bit of an epiphany, if you will. She confronted something she had never confronted before, and that is mortality. This is when she saw a vision of how he could be free, and when she did, she wanted nothing more than that for him, because it was extraordinary. We see Caleb's wife tending to him. I guess she was a nurse, and that's how they met in this moment. This is where they had Frankie, aka C, and 23 years later, she grows up to be digging alongside Bernard. And ultimately the reveal of this, if you want to call it a reveal, was just that Maeve said she had to stay away to kind of keep him safe, if anything, and that's why she's been alone for all these years, and that's why she left. Except it would have been fine, but one day she got curious, so she reached out through the grid to find him, and that kind of kicked off the events for what ultimately led up to these events, for where Caleb ultimately died. Maeve also kind of got buried, and I guess, hey Maeve, if you wouldn't have done that, is this kind of Maeve's fault? But ultimately, in the timeline of all timelines, I guess something would have happened eventually with Halloris. But anyway, they get to the dig site, and that is when the man in black starts, unloading fire on Maeve. Caleb takes Loris to that control shed, if you will, and this is where we're edging near the end of the episode. We have Caleb reach out to his team. We get some audio from them just saying, oh yeah, your family's fine. We lost cover, but it's just like in this moment, they're working for Haloris, and she even reveals that in a few minutes' time. Haloris tells Caleb to pick up the gun, aim it at Maeve, and this is, again, why I feel so sad about Caleb. Even though we still kind of got him, but not really, he still managed to resist the parasite and shoot William, the man in black, in that moment, instead of Maeve, which is just insane. Like, he kind of defied all odds and still managed to resist that whilst being stabbed. Even Haloris in this moment, despite this being a recap or not, was like, how did you disobey me? Now this, I do want to bring to your attention, could basically insinuate what an outlier is, that there are some people in the human race that, despite that this is a parasite or whatever, that there must be some brains that can or have a capability to resisting whatever this is, if you know what I mean. And I'm not saying that Caleb was an outlier before he died, but it does maybe foreshadow and symbolize, when she says, how did you disobey me? And then you go back to the 23-year later conversation between J and C saying, we need to go and extract this outlier. Like, that's more important to them than finding some, treasure myth, if you know what I mean. So definitely something more to that outlier thing, and maybe this was teasing that. And then despite William being sprayed by many bullets, he manages to get a shot right in Maeve's sternum, if you will. And ultimately, I don't think any of this matters properly because the host control unit is the only thing, as long as you can copy another body. So I actually am kind of intrigued with what we're about to talk about with the uncovering of Maeve, how they're going to reactivate her. Maybe they might try and print another body, but will that mean they need to find a host printing station? As long as the host control unit's intact, things should be good. This is where things got fishy, though, because this is where Haloris was saying, do you remember what happened now? Do you remember this moment? And this is where she's like, come on, Caleb, think. And then it's like, if you think back to it, this is what they try and do. They try and, to test the fidelity. It's him coming to the nature of his own reality, but it has to be approached in a certain way. Otherwise, you might glitch out too much like we've seen in prior seasons. And even Caleb was glitching out with little grunts and noises he was making. And that made me feel really bad for him because, it's self-explanatory. Like, you imagine realizing you're a host in this moment and having that kind of, consciousness awake. And so they burst in and they shoot him. And then it, cuts to him being okay. And you think, okay, that was just a cop-out fake scene. But no, it was actually what canonically happened, if you will. She says, you died right here. Caleb asks, where am I? And that's when Haloris says, the question you should be asking isn't where, but when. And she's essentially establishing a baseline for fidelity. She reveals that he's the 278th version of Caleb. So there's been 277 Calebs built to try and establish fidelity, because I guess it's still an imperfect process to create someone like the Man in Black version of the host, or, Caleb, who this one is now successful, I guess. This one is successful, but you still, even 23 years later, Haloris has gone through the effort of doing this 277 times, because just like what we had with Delos back in the day, James Delos, he glitched out too many times. And this is where we see him wake up. He's in that same kind of outfit as what the others had been in when they were getting tested. He's starting to glitch a bit, if you will, making these noises as reality just completely folds in on itself for him. Then it cuts to Bernard digging. C says that she has her own reasons for digging, and Bernard's just like, they're not about a weapon, are they? You're looking for your father. And she's like, my father's dead. He goes on to say that that's what you've told yourself as a child, but you never can really bring yourself to believe it, can you? And she goes on to say, well, they said it happened here. If it's true, there'll be a body. Now, I am wondering, before we get on to, Caleb running outside and everything, do you think it's possible that even though we have this host version of Caleb, who's now the 278th and successful version, do you think it's possible that Caleb was kept alive, just like William? Think about it. William's being kept up. He had his throat cut by the other Man in Black. He's still alive, but he was put in cryogenic sleep, if you will. I wonder if there's going to be a reveal that when Bernard and Maeve, after having been unearthed, saves the day, they also find that Caleb could have been suspended and kept safe. I'm not sure. I think that is a reach. I really do. But I don't see how you're going to have a proper personal connection with C if we have C and Maeve reunite with Caleb, but even though this host version, who's now proven fidelity, is essentially the Caleb they knew, it's still not the exact, it's not the original, you know, it's not really that person. So I wonder if Halloris has actually kept the original Caleb after that knife stab. And as we know, literally, the man in black is cryogenically being kept in stasis. So 23 years later, I'm guessing the same thing could have happened to Caleb, cryogenically being suspended until maybe being rescued. It also could link with the line of how Bernard says to C, that's what you've told yourself, you know, ever since you were a child, but you can never really bring yourself to believe it. But either way, he keeps on digging, and they find, you know, the dig site logo or board, if you will, and underneath it is a very mummified, almost looking Maeve. We go back to Caleb looking out the window at the new world 23 years later. Halloris says it's time for a new narrative, and he starts running. He starts running out the building. Halloris is just smiling. As I said earlier, he runs out the same building that looks as though where Christina went to work, called Olympiad Entertainment. I believe that's where she wrote those narratives for people. And this is where Caleb notices the tower in the distance, which is super interesting to me because people like Christina and other people, most people, unless it's Peter or maybe the homeless guy, don't actually see the tower. It's like it's got a mental block in their head. They can't see it, like what we've actually seen before in Westworld. But in this moment, I guess it's like Halloris has allowed Caleb to see the tower, and that's what's giving those signals out for the people who have now been taken over with that parasite, if you will, to be suggestible to any kind of order. And this is when Halloris flexes and freezes everyone in the city, and he realizes that she's won, and she says, "Welcome to my world." And I love how the episode ends with just, you know, panning out the cityscape. You see the tower there. And Jonathan Nolan said in the behind the scenes of this episode that they always love screwing around a little bit with the audience, and this is kind of what I was saying earlier, with the audience's expectations and our expectations of the pace of which a narrative unfolds. So having carefully set up a season in which it seems quite clear that the season will be about preventing Hale from being able to do this thing, we have this delicious moment where we realize that she's a very formidable enemy and she's already done it, that the war is already lost, and we're on to a very, very different conflict. And that is, I assume, you know, just trying to prevent this being a permanent end to the world. Now, the promo for the next episode shows a few things, such as some scenes that were reminiscent for the trailers of this season, such as Halloris dancing in the street with those people dancing in the streets. She's showing William around the tower and everything like that. So I wonder if we're going to get a little bit into the past of when she brings about the host William saying, look, this is what I've done with the world. Maybe she's inducting him into the new world. So honestly, I really enjoyed this episode. And Aaron Paul even said, I'm sure they always want to say something like this, but that this season is possibly crazier than any other season before. And this episode felt like it really did start to get that ball rolling more than ever, especially when you have the deception of the world is kind of already under Halloris' control. So I thought this episode was really, really fun and entertaining. The biggest thing is that despite getting answers to a few questions, now I have bigger questions. Who is Teddy and what is he doing in this future world 23 years later? I guess I should stop calling it the future because it's now actually the present day. Do you think any of the wild theories in this review I said, like, could Caleb still be alive through the animation we saw the man in black in previous episodes? Could he still be alive in the future? I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if it kind of ends in such a way where the host copy of Caleb sacrifices himself ultimately towards the finale, and then it turns out that there is a real version of him still left, and then he wakes up and, hey, yeah, we got the real dad back, you know? So I'm gonna look forward to reading your comments down in the comments below, guys. Crazy episode. Crazy episodes ahead, I'm sure. Like this video if you did enjoy it. I'd really appreciate that. Do subscribe if you want to stay up to date with more recap, reviews, and breakdowns like this on Westworld, and maybe some other videos on the channel that you enjoy watching. Until next week, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow hosts and humans in the next video. Goodbye.